Well, you would lose the plot, wouldn't you, if the kids didn't come home for well over a decade? And Jacqueline Pascarl did for a while, but gradually she built an amazing life fighting for the rights of children. Jacqueline, welcome to Talking Heads.
Lovely to be here.
In many ways, what you've gone through is the most difficult imaginable experience for a parent.
It's kind of like having a giant apple core taken to your soul, and that part of you suddenly is gone, it disappears, and you grow with this membrane to cope. And yeah, you have to learn to cope. It's a choice of either slashing your wrists, crawling into a corner and dying, or, and I tried that to a certain extent, but it's a point of just taking one breath and exhaling and inhaling and exhaling, and there is no script for it and there is no manual for it. You just have to feel your way.
Well, quite unexpectedly, step by step, brick by brick, the trauma that you'd gone through led to a whole new world of work for you.
I couldn't fight for my own children and remain silent about others. It became very important to me. I think it kept me sane, actually. That.
Jack, let's go back and look at your life, especially your difficult childhood. And as we'll see, when your prince arrived, you were really ripe for rescuing.
I remember being a very small baby and this woman, who was my mother, looming over me and struggling with my nappy, and then incredible pain. She pinned me and the nappy together, and it was pretty much downhill from then on. My father was a Malaysian Chinese student who came to study in Australia, and they married and had me. But unfortunately, when my father realised I was a girl, he left when I was 5 days old. So my mother was really unwell, and I suppose what you'd now know as postpartum depression. And my grandmother brought me up. And when I was 2, my mother was on a combination of experimental medicinal drugs, and she overdosed, but it left her with temporal lobe epilepsy and an enormous personality change. My godparents, Auntie Connie and Uncle Kevin, they stepped in, and with my grandmother they looked after me for a great deal of my childhood on their dairy farm in South Gippsland. It's from them I think I got most of my sanity, certainly my ability to cook. When I was in prep, kids used to throw mud and stones and rocks at me, singing, you know, ching chong, ning nong, and it made no sense to me because I was Australian. My beloved Uncle Gordon, who was my grandmother's brother, and he'd fought on Kokoda. When he passed away, he gave me his medals. That was who my family was. And strangely though, that didn't fit in. My insides didn't fit with the perception of my outsides. I was constantly being told I was different. When I was 10, I was very excited about having my 10th birthday because it was double digits, and I'd been coasting along. English and writing were my, absolute love, as well as dancing. And my mother had been resident in a psychiatric hospital for quite a long period of time. And she met a man across a crowded group therapy session and decided that he would be my stepfather.
Jack, life quickly became hell with your stepfather on hand.
Yes, I was cut off from my grandmother and my godparents. And my stepfather, it was implicit in his relationship with my mother that I was part of the newfound domestic package, which involved him having access to me and abusing me.
What was your adolescent relationship like with your mother?
Horrendous. At some points when she was in and out of the relationship with this man, I became the parent. I did the banking, the bill paying, the slapping across the face when she was hysterical, getting into the doctors for her psychiatric medication. I used to do it on a scooter. I had a blue and yellow scooter and just to scoot down the road to the bank and do that sort of thing. Dealt with her lovers in between occasionally, and then tried to dance in between or read.
Were you accepted? Did you have friends?
No, I didn't have friends. I had 2 friends. I had Patricia Ladowney, who I remember, she was nice to me. And I went to I went to 2 birthday parties when I was growing up in primary school. Patricia Ladowney's and Marianne Hutchinson's. And other than that, I wasn't allowed to mix with children. And friendships weren't encouraged. I wasn't allowed to have people home to visit at all. I was cut off. It was to school and back from school. That was the rule.
As your father was dying, you met him for the first time.
Mm.
What was that like?
I was taken to Singapore. It was 10 days, almost 10 days of out-of-body experience where my self-worth was brought on in terms of being told I was beautiful and being told I was obviously clever. But at the same time, I was balancing an almost psychotic mother in the background, trying to keep her calm so she wouldn't pull me away from my father. I was never allowed with my father in private. She was afraid of something, afraid of me forming a bond with my father, or afraid of me asking or getting the questions answered that I wanted so badly to know. Why did he leave me when I was 5 days old?
There was obviously a tremendous vulnerability you had, and I suppose that vulnerability was most exposed towards being loved.
Absolutely, I was ripe for the picking. I was introduced to quite a striking young man who was Malaysian, who actually lavished attention and seemed so determined to court me. And at 17, I started going out with him. He'd been sent here to Melbourne University to do architecture. Byron was 10 years older than I was, and he would tell me how things would be. And I just went along with it. And he said, we are going back to Malaysia. We either get married or we break up. Byron was the grandson of the former King of Malaysia. And we had to go back, he said, to get married during his uncle's coronation, who had inherited the throne. Byron had told me that it was necessary for me to become a Muslim to marry him. And I recited this phrase, and then I was given a new name. I was the Lady Yasmin. And suddenly, I'm told that he signed the bit of paper, he's done the vows in another room, and I was married. That was it. And the next morning at 5 a.m, I was being awoken by servants, and I was on my way to a coronation. It was trial by fire, trial by royalty, really. We then came back to Malaysia when he finished his university course. And from the moment we arrived, it was as though I was married to a stranger. He was completely engulfed by his own sense of royalty and importance. And I became incredibly lonely, and he became increasingly distant, except that we had to have a baby. I found out I was pregnant, finally, on my 19th birthday, and I was in a state of bliss. When I looked into his eyes for the very first time, it was instantaneous love, and I was gone for life. But when I had a baby, I also grew a very Australian brain. By the time I was pregnant with my second child, Shahira, our relationship had degenerated so badly that it had become physically abusive. Shortly after giving birth to Shahira, he took a second wife without my permission, even though he had sworn on the Quran he would not do so. When Shahira was 4 months old, I received an urgent phone call from Australia that my nana had a very severe fall and asking for me. I desperately wanted to go, but by this time I was under house arrest. Thank goodness the Sultana interceded with the Sultan to allow me to go back to Melbourne.